Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sika Strength live stream. Owen will be here momentarily. So, to give you the usual rundown for those of you who aren't regulars, get your questions in as early as you possibly can, because most of the time we don't catch up to all the questions. So, getting them in early is absolutely vital. I hope you're having a good day. I hope your training is going well. Patrick Branford says, have a Guinness on me. Patrick, I'd love to have a Guinness on you, but I've got training later. Maybe this weekend. If you ever come to Cork in Ireland, I would highly recommend skipping the Guinness and going for a Murphy's instead. Murphy's Stout is far superior in every way to Guinness Stout, but Guinness is quite good as well if it's poured well, if the taps are good. So keep getting the questions in. We'll go from the oldest through to the newest. For people who are Sika Strength members, or you're running the Sika Strength programs and you're in the Facebook group, you're probably used to hearing me saying the same saying every single time we do a coaching stream. So like giving people feedback on their videos. And sometimes I feel like now when I start talking in a normal video, I automatically end up saying that same paragraph that I say at the start of everyone. I feel like I'm on a Ryanair flight and I'm an air host giving that usual spiel. I was just saying, I feel like because I'm starting a live stream, I feel like I'm going to start giving the usual spiel that I give on the coaching live streams.
All about
to the Facebook group, yeah. Going from oldest question through to newest question. I'll be sharing my screen as we go.
Vegas I got one.
Okay, Skate961 says, do you have any experience in personal training? If so, can you give tips on how to be an effective trainer? Yeah, I have a good load of experience in
Realize
personal training.
that you're going to make no difference in a person's life. That's not true.
The major thing I would say is have like an expectation of outcome conversation with your client. So, and then a realistic measurement of that outcome, because a lot of clients will commit for like, oh, I'm going to do it for 4 weeks, or I'm going to do it for 6 weeks, or I'll do 10 sessions with you and then I'll start going to normal classes or whatever. Have the conversation with them as to what a good outcome is from these sessions or from this block of sessions. What's a good outcome from the next year of training? What's a good outcome from them doing a load of gym training? That's my major piece of advice. And then my second piece of advice is like, be as efficient as possible with the time. Like, people don't need the 100% scientifically backed as of 2023 sets, reps, and load range for just them in that situation. They don't need to be constantly monitored every day. Most general population people need to come in, you need to exercise, probably need to lift some weights or do some resistance training. Then they probably need to do some range of motion work. Like, so if you're hitting those three things of some cardiovascular exercise, some resistance training, and some increased mobility or flexibility or range of motion generally, they're probably doing a good job. But you don't think people lean into that scientific base of training a lot, when general populations, you really don't need to be doing heart rate or heart rate variability analysis on them every single session. It just needs to be really simple, feeling like they're working hard, and then going from there.
I think the two biggest pieces of advice I have for you is, the first one is understand that in general population training, you're more likely to have no impact in that person's life in terms of their positive outcomes. People just won't make those changes than you are to have those outcomes. And I think a lot of people come into the industry in that side of things, the general population, with purely health oriented outcomes, and they're very optimistic and they're very hopeful for the effect they'll have on their clients. And it's very endearing, and it's great that people come into it like that. But unfortunately, when you're around gyms long enough and you see enough people regularly and you know those people, you'll know that most of the time, most people don't make very good changes. And it might be unfortunate, it might be somewhat pessimistic, but a lot of the data on weight loss and the ability to keep weight off is very, very consistent. And there's a huge amount of effort goes into these research. And if you read a lot of this research, you can almost read the angst in the researchers' abstract and conclusions when they're talking about uh, looking for any way to help people lose weight, looking for any novel forms of losing weight and keeping weight off, whether that's like using fucking SARMs all the way to the any time of carb loading or ketogenic diet or anything, because it's such a difficult thing for people to lose weight. And so when you're a personal trainer, it's very, very important to understand that it's not your fault if they are not making positive changes after a reasonable period of time, and if they relapse. It's not your issue. You do your best to help them, you give them good advice, you help them train, you do as many training sessions as they sign up for and push them harder. Then you give them dietary advice if that's part of your personal training thing, which it generally is. And then from there you accept that they are their own unique individuals, because you see a lot of people get pretty jaded. They spend 30 odd hours a week PTing, which is a lot of time on your feet, work with people one to one, a lot of mental capacity where you're always on. And then they just end up kind of losing interest in the industry because people don't change, or it becomes a little bit, they live a little bit jaded. So it's very important just to come in to think, I'm going to do my best to help these people. I'm going to do my best to give them the right information, but ultimately I have to accept that they probably won't make, there's more of a chance of them not really making any meaningful changes. The other thing in regard to that is on your financial side of things, once you're confident enough, having done enough personal training of people, you need to move to group PTs. That is so much more financially viable. It's so much more financially aggressive, bumblebees. So it's so much of a better option for you. It's absolutely of no impact to the quality of PT your client gets, because most of the time PTs is spent making up small talk and learning how to be a people person, where you're chatting to them and you're talking about random stuff, what they're doing at the weekend or what they're doing that night or what their family is like and all this stuff. Most of that daytime is just spent talking. Whereas if you have a group of 2 to 3 people and you're charging near enough the full price, they're still getting the exact same quality of service. One person's doing one exercise, one person's doing the other one. You're helping people out all the time. You're still busy for that hour. You're probably more busy than you would be otherwise, but you're getting a lot more income in that hour. You're getting a lot more quality work done. And I know not a lot, but certainly it is, in the way the industry is moving, is small group PTs, either people who know each other or in individuals who are just set up. You're like, you're coming in at 6 and you know that you can put these 2 people in the same PT studio or wherever it is and have them do stuff and get it done well. It is a skill in itself and it does take a lot of work to get there, but it should be your end goal if you want to make a lot of money as a PT and keep it rolling. Because a one-to-one, unless you're charging some incredibly um crazy uh area code kind of massive money for PTs, we're talking like $200-300 or €200 or €300 an hour. The individual PTs can become a big slog and leaves you financially not very viable for the long run.
Yeah, the last thing I will say on PTs, and this is having known lots of PTs and worked at PTs and had a gym, don't constantly worry about justifying everything you're giving to someone. Most of the time people are coming in, they're paying you to do the job of writing the program, delivering the program in the best way possible. Don't spend your entire hour or 45 minutes with the person constantly going over, this is why you're doing it. And I've seen it lots and lots of times where someone is constantly going over the merits of the use of the squat or the merits of circuit training or the merits of high intensity interval training as the person is going through. And that's really not what anyone wants to hear. Most of the time people are training. Some people will want to chat to you or just not talk to you, but most of the time people are training, they just want normal conversation, and they really don't care about the thing you learned about in second year muscle physiology or any of that.
Yeah, a lot of the time the reason people keep coming back to you is because it's a really enjoyable hour with them. If you're, some people will be really type A driven people and they just want work orientated, good service, very efficient, very consistent. And they will be the usually people who are coming to you at 5 o'clock in the morning because they have a lot on, they work very stressful jobs. They work very financially lucrative jobs, and the people who just want you to get them done, get their thing done. They don't want to think about this and move on. But there's a lot of people who just kind of want a friend for an hour, something to chat, some kind of social stuff. So you got to learn what kind of your clients are. There's a lot to it to be a good
Absolutely.
PT.
Yeah. John says, hello, lads. Alex, it appears as though he's in Cork, but Alex, apparently you know nothing about Cork because you said Beamish and Guinness over Murphy's. I'd appreciate the Beamish versus Murphy's debacle, and it's wrong, but some people prefer Beamish, but there's absolutely no way you could put Guinness in that triad.
No way.
Okay, he says he's enjoying every minute of being in Cork. That's great to hear. Ben says the most educational time of the week. Nemo says day 2 of asking for Sika stanazanol. Okay. Not that strong says, can the RTA be run once a week over the course of 16 weeks? No. So that's really not ideal. In training, in programming in general, you work in butter zones, right? So let's just take overall training volume as an example of this. You have an amount of training that is too little. You have a quite broad range of training that will get some sort of adaptation. Then you have an amount of training that is too much. You'll go from overreaching to overtraining, right? So taking that same principle with frequency, there is an amount of times you need to do something per week. Then there is a range of amount of times that will get a good reaction from it. And then there's an amount of times you can do it that is too much. Squatting once a week can work in certain cases. It can work for weightlifters, powerlifters, strength athletes, general athletes, squatting once per week. But doing something as aggressive as the RTA squat program once per week really isn't it. So what we would see in those cases is, rather than having that super aggressive slope of progression like we have in the RTA of going from 10s and 8s all the way up along to 8s and 6s, 6s and 3s, 3s and 5s, all the way up to our single, that line of progression is very aggressive. And that line of progression works because it works over 8 weeks where you're doing it twice per week. Now, it might be where you do those sessions every 4 days instead of every 3 days and then every fourth day after that. But you stretching it slightly is okay. So maybe taking 11 or 12 or 13 weeks to do it would be okay. Taking 9 or 10 or 11 weeks to do it would be okay. But when we start getting into only one squat session per week, the gap in between those squat sessions is probably too high. You could have a squat cycle that would work. It obviously wouldn't work as well or as effectively as the RTA would, but you really don't want to be stretching out those sessions too much, because that's not how that squat program was written. Super Alternate says, greetings, gentlemen. Thoughts on Tom Platz's extremely narrow style squat or narrow style squat stance
Try that again.
as your main squat variation if your goal is pure hypertrophy of the quad, or just stick to normal moderate stance high bar squats? So Tom Platz, there's a couple of things in this. Firstly, Tom Platz was extremely well built for that style of squat. For a lot of people, people with a longer leg, and particularly a longer upper leg, that's going to be a very difficult style of squat to achieve, right? So Tom was well built for that style of squat. And even if he was just coming into the gym first day with those relative levers and that amount of range of motion he had, or that amount of mobility he had in those joints, it's very likely that when looking for optimal squat technique, it mightn't have been that narrow, but it would have been a quite narrow stance, quite toes forward stance, quite upright, and with a lot of ankles or knee pushing forward and ankle flexion happening. For many people, that's going to be a very, very difficult style to emulate. So if you were just looking for optimal squat technique, that's probably not it. Now, with that being said, doing the narrower stance, toe straight ahead, a lot of knee forward travel, that works extremely well for quad strength. Now, whether the squat is the best tool overall or the number one tool you want to use for quad hypertrophy, that's a different thing. But certainly, the narrower you bring your stance and the more you bring your toes into a straightforward position, the more quad activation you're going to get, which in turn will give you more stimulus in the quads and a greater chance of hypertrophy happening. But it really does depend. You just might not be able to squat like that. And so instead of that, if it's just quad hypertrophy, you're looking for a standard squat, or else squatting with that narrow stance with some assistance, such as a Smith machine, might be a better option for you. I know Mike Israel of RP Strength, you'll see him using that very narrow stance squat. He actually has a very, very nice high bar back squat, but you'll see him using it on occasion in a Smith machine for that kind of assistance.
Andrew said, "Hi lads, hope you're well. Are you going to the Cork City Games later this year to see the Irish shot record get broken again?" I didn't even know.
I had no idea.
I didn't even know the Cork City Games was still going.
Jesus, the last time I heard about the Cork City Games was when I was in 6th class in primary school.
And did you see the spot or the post sent you about Joseph Believin getting injured? I think we did actually. Yeah, we saw the video. Pretty brutal.
Please, nobody send us videos of people breaking their wrists during cleans.
Oh, someone sent us that. Not ready for it.
The problem is, you open the video and it could be like 11 o'clock at night, and you just, oh, somebody tagged you in something, you'll open it, and then it's a double wrist break.
A double whammy.
No, nobody wants to see that.
Bowlog said, "Drop the premium shit talk episode I almost missed. Please post on Instagram." Yeah, we actually did forget to share that one. We're bringing back the shit talks again, so we'll be back weekly for the next couple of weeks. Alex said, "Any thoughts on doing mobility work in the morning instead of around the evening training session?" So mobility is kind of like a savings in the bank somewhat, except that unlike the bank, the money is leaking out at a really consistent rate depending on your genetics and what you're doing in training. So you can bank some mobility, and that's the good reason, is that eventually if you do enough mobility, you can end up doing a lot less mobility to maintain the same amount of mobility. But I would say never take your mobility for granted. So if you gain it, you should keep working on it, because mobility is kind of a skill as much as it is physiological changes to your tissue. So of course, like strength training, there's physiological changes, and like endurance work or mobility is no different, but it still needs to be a consistent and repeated skill that you need to practice as much as possible. Mobility is something that people think, oh, let's say they'll look at a study and they'll do an intervention with foam rolling, and they'll show immediate change to mobility immediately after they foam roll. And they'll look at, like, for example, hamstring flexibility, and they'll measure it in an objective way. And then they will say, like, people retested their mobility a week later and it returned to normal, or returned a little bit above baseline or something. And people will use that as a means of rebuttal against mobility work or foam rolling, and saying that, see, it doesn't work. But we know it does work. We don't expect to do one squat session and then maintain those gains forever. We don't expect to do one training block and maintain those gains forever. We know with strength training and aerobic work that we have to keep reinforcing it. And mobility is no different. We need to doing mobility nice and consistently. So you can do some before in the morning. I would say, why not both if it's something you need to address? So a little bit in the morning and a little bit reinforced before training is definitely beneficial. Sometimes people do try and lump it all together in one session a week. So they'll do like 1 hour of some mobility app that they have, and the hour might be great, but they won't do anything for the rest of the week, or they'll half-ass their warm-ups then, or mobility if they need to work on mobility before their training session. So definitely, I would say for this question, why not do it in the morning and before session? It doesn't take that long, if you can gather 10 or 15 minutes to do what you need to do and address it. So once you get to training, then if you've done some in the morning and you've been really consistent with it for the last few weeks, by the time you get to training, then you can reduce the amount of time you need to do before training, so you're all ready to go. And generally after you wake up, you're going to probably have a lot more stiffness or less pliability in those particular things that are immobile currently. And so then once you do address them in the morning, when you get on top of it straight away, you're more likely to reinforce the idea that these places need to be mobile to survive, per se.
Yeah, I really like the idea of you having your kind of daily things that you're going to work on, and you doing that, even if it's not on a daily basis, you doing that multiple times per week away from training. So if it was me and I was going back to weightlifting, I'd have ankle mobility and probably some sort of hip mobility work that I'd do every morning, or every day, maybe at lunchtime when I had a bit of a break from work. And that's something I do on a consistent basis. Then when I go to training and I start warming up, I'd probably do the kind of very specific things. So if it was for the snatch, I'd obviously be warming up my ankles and my hips, but I'd also be addressing that kind of overhead squat position with the snatch width grip and doing some specific mobility work around that. The other advantage of those specific pieces is as you're warming up, your body is more receptive to those kind of range of motion changes, you know. So as the joint is warming up, as you're getting more synovial fluid around the joint, as the muscle tissues are warming up, as that fascia is better able to slide over the muscle, all of that facilitates small but better outcomes and a small but more immediate outcomes. So in terms of the kind of test retest model for mobility, there's nothing better than you starting to warm up with an empty barbell or a technique bar and you doing some overhead squats, and then you go and you spend 3 minutes with a lacrosse ball opening up your lats, or maybe you're opening up your ankles, and then you go back to your technique bar or an empty bar, and now suddenly you do your overhead squats and it's far better. You know, that's a real win, you know, and that's kind of an instant win in terms of getting an immediate outcome from your mobility work. So both are very good. And as Owen said, why not do both? Both will be better. Okay. Ben says, did you manage to secure tickets for the Olympics? Yes. I just don't know which ones they are. Is it weightlifting and judo?
Yep.
Weightlifting and judo. Smith Jitsu says, hey lads, if I feel I'm losing some tightness in the very bottom portion of the squat, should I cut the depth a little? Yes and no. So the first thing is, initially, are you losing that at all weights? So is it just a motor control issue? Or is it you lose it at slightly heavier weights where you try and speed up a small bit and get more of a bounce out of the hole? In the cases where, so this is obviously a pretty common thing where it happens with athletes. In the cases where it's happening at heavier weights, I don't get people to cut the depth. I just get them to cut the load. They stay below that kind of ceiling where we see it happening. And then over the course of 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 12 weeks, they'll slowly go back to loading those barbells a small bit heavier. If it's happening at all weights and it's kind of a motor control issue, and say in your case, you're a jiu-jitsu athlete, in that case, then what they'll do is they'll do full depth squats on an empty barbell to practice the actual movement, to practice that level of motor control. And then their working sets will be just to above parallel or just at parallel. Maybe you'll have some sort of kinesthetic feedback. So something like a band stretched across the squat rack behind you, just so you can sit down and know when you're at that right height. That stuff can really, really help. The really important thing for this is that you're staying on top of it and you're really monitoring it. So videoing the squats every single time you're doing them, reviewing them in between your sets can be very, very valuable for this. But certainly if you're an athlete and it's just a motor control issue, you can still continue to train your squat just at that slightly higher depth. And then as you're doing each of those sessions, you'll still be doing full depth back squats, but at a much, much lighter load.
Phil Louis put like a 4-part poem, which I won't read, but he has put a bit of work into it, so you can have a look if you want, about killing himself with squats. Project Outer said, "Morning lads." Project, a long time questioner of the live streams. Being seeing a lot of Mike Menser stuff recently. His belief in how much you should do in a bodybuilding style workout is very interesting. Any thoughts on this methodology? Mike Menser. Jesus, that name sounds really familiar, but I haven't seen,
I don't know who that is.
What he's been. I haven't seen who's been coming up on. But Mike Menser. Oh yes, he was that dude. I don't know what it is he was purporting to say to do. So I can't really give any good.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Like Mike Menser training routine, high intensity training, the Mike Menser way. Barbell squats 5x6, leg extensions 5x8, hamstring curls 5x8, standing calf raises 5x10. Looks pretty normal, but maybe there's something different.
Is it the intensity is higher?
Want to keep his best shape and would often keep his training week down to 3 working days and 4 days of rest.
That's just unfettered gear use as well.
I was just going to say that is.
There's a lot of bodybuilders from back in the day, not even back that long ago, but like back in the 90s, and they'll have their training method. And a lot of the time, their training method will have like 1 or 2 dumb things in it, and they'll get away with it because of gear. I'm not saying that's what it is in this case. But
Mhm.
you'll see, like, there's another bodybuilder, I can't remember his full name, and I'm not going to use his first name. Um, he talked about, you train one muscle group constantly to exhaustion, and then you train the muscle group next to it, so all the blood pools in those muscles and bursts those capillary beds faster. And like, if you're on a ball of gear and you do that kind of training, you're gonna have good results. You'll have a good results anyway. But a lot of that kind of stuff I really don't buy into. Like, it's well known what works in terms of hypertrophy, well known what works in terms of strength training. And usually when you see someone going kind of away from the norm, um, I question it.
So basically, he was saying obliterate the muscles and then move on. His workouts were 45 minutes in duration. It was completely antithetical to the mainstream approach. Well, there are a lot of, wasn't Dorian Yates reportedly supposed to train like that, where it was like 45 minutes of whatever.
Yeah.
Ben said, also be interesting seeing a video on Jessica Butner for the squat series. Funny enough,
Yeah.
we were only talking about that we were reminded of her when she was on Zach's channel recently, when she beat Zach on squatting, which is massively impressive. So her squat is good. Her
She has
deadlift,
a unique squat style as well, which
yeah,
is good to talk about.
her deadlift style is her conventional deadlift is immaculate. So she's very good. She will eventually do a deadlift series.
Capsule Cheeseburger says, hey, I'm 27, looking to add more cardio work to my current training plan. I do 3 times a week strength training and 3 times a week BJJ currently. How should I go about this? So, assuming you're recovering well enough and you have enough of this kind of recovery capital to use up, and you don't have to change any training sessions around, or you don't have to reduce one strength training session or take out a BJJ session, in this case, 2 sessions a week of cardio work would be absolutely sufficient. Depending on how much of that aforementioned recovery capital you have, my number one thing would be high intensity running style workouts or high intensity bike style workouts. So just pure and utter cardio work. Don't change it up and do like conditioning circuits where you're swinging kettlebells and everything like that. You're doing plenty of power training, plenty of strength training in those weight training sessions, or at least I hope you are. And so in that case, you need to be purely addressing the cardiovascular system. So rowing machines, cycling ergs, ski ergs, or just pure and utter running will work very, very well. You don't need to look at specific time domains. You don't need to make it specific to, if you fight 5-minute rounds in IBJJF competition, you don't really need to make it specific to there. Most of your high intensity running style interval workouts will be perfect for this. So an example of a session might be 10 400-meter repeats with a 2-minute rest in between each one. Another example might be a 25-meter hill run or hill sprint. Doesn't have to be a very steep hill. In fact, it would be better if it's not a very steep hill, so your pace will stay consistent. And you might do sprint up and walk back with a timed walk back, or sprint up and jog back with a timed rest interval in between. If it was me and I was programming for you, I'd want your cardio sessions to be somewhere between 25 minutes and 45 minutes long. Obviously, that depends on the amount of cardio work we have to do, the particular modality we're going after first. So whether it's slightly longer distance, or whether it's kind of more glycolytic or creatine phosphate system you'll be going after, depends on that, and it also depends on how well you'll be able to recover.
I like how he said he was 27.
Yeah.
Spencer Neal said, morning coaches, what are your thoughts on a water cut versus a calorie cut? So I think we talked about this in depth in the last live stream or the live stream before, but the long story short is that for most weight class sports, pretty much all of them, and for most people in general, you should be really close to your sport or your desired weight class. And if you're not, you're probably in the weight class, and that might be temporarily, or it might be altogether. So if you're not in pretty good shape, if you're not relatively lean, if you're beyond that 15% body fat and you're in a double digit class, then you're probably a little bit too heavy, and you're ideally would be in a better condition somewhere else if you're a little bit leaner. Now, that doesn't hold for ultra heavies, and then it comes down to a health selection. But for most people, unless you're uber competitive, we prefer the idea that you are operating around your weight class for recreational athletes. You know, if you're a professional athlete, obviously things are different. And even then, it's better for a lot of recreational athletes. If you're able to train better, you'll feel better all around, you'll be healthier. You know, most likely, you're not Conor McGregor in the UFC. But even then, it's still better for your body and better for your training in most scenarios. But so the idea there is that it's not so much a calorie cut, it's that you are operating in the right weight class before you do the calorie cut. So I don't like when people cut a huge amount of calories 2 weeks out from the competition, and then are concerned on why they didn't perform that well or wondering. So in this scenario, water cut is always better. And we use water cuts, a load of people, we've used it ourselves, and it is very, very effective. So preferably you're really close to your weight class. You know, let's say you're competing as an 85 kilo athlete in something, and you're 86 and a half kilos walking around, and that's where you naturally stay at maintenance and you're able to train effectively and you feel good there. That's a very reasonable water cut to make, and you can practice that and you can do it, and there's no problem, and no one's doing any egregious water cutting, and then you can rehydrate and you make the weight class no problem. But the real problems are when you are competing at 85 and you're 94 kilos, and for the 2 weeks beforehand you cut out all carbohydrates, you lose like 2 kilos in glycogen, and then you piss out a lot of water, and then you might lose a little body fat and muscle mass, and then you're 4 kilos away from being 85, and then you have to water cut to that. But then, not on top of that water cut, you also have a harder time shedding water because you stopped eating all your carbohydrates and you pissed out all the water, and then a lot of water retention. And so then you have to do a lot of thermal cutting on top of the water cut, and then you're really putting yourself through the ringer to make weight. And it's something both of us has done. It's very, very stupid, but it's not the best way to do things. So the best scenario, or what we prefer, is close to your weight class, and then water cut to it. Uh, Preferably, still, you would never even cut unless you're very, very competitive in this class. But it's not ideal to be doing extreme calorie cuts and water cuts like 4 or 5 times a year.
So weight cutting in general, as Owen was saying, isn't great, right? But my general rule with the calorie versus water is if you're 2 to 3 weeks out from the competition, not calories. If you're longer than 2 to 3 weeks out, and we can make a meaningful change to body fat percentage or amount of muscle mass you hold, then you could do some calorie cutting. If it's within realistically that 2 to 3 weeks, or more realistically a month out, it's a water cut. Water cuts work all the time. They don't drain you that much. It's not ideal. It's not an ideal situation, but that's weight class sports aren't ideal situations. So for me, if it's an athlete and they're asking for advice, if it's 2 to 3 weeks out, it's a water cut. If it's longer than 2 to 3 weeks out, if we have 2 to 3 months, then by all means, we'll do a bit of a calorie restriction for 2 months. And then the month previous, we'll try and keep calories very, very consistent as you lead into the fight or the event or whatever it is. And maybe some water cutting on top of that. But I really don't like calorie restriction prior to the events themselves.
Or like an emergency calorie restriction, like that's
the worst case.
like a really good case is your, I don't know, I didn't talk about the second meal. A great case is you're 88 kilos now, you're 16 weeks out from competition, you are very adept at your own nutrition, or you've employed a very good nutritionist, and you're like, okay, we need to be 85 kilos or 84.9 on the competition day while still maintaining strong and training. And then you very gradually cut down your calories, which a lot of, that's generally the one most weightlifters will take, or most high level weightlifters will do. So that's probably the better option. So it's a sustainable calorie cut is the better option, not emergency calorie cut or unplanned or emergency water loading per se.
Jake says, I don't have the guts to run the RTA again straight away after I finish this block. Do you think a ton of belt squats and core work is a good way to go?
Yeah.
That's a grand way to go.
There's nothing wrong with that.
If you really need a break, it's a grand way to go. It would be better to run the maintenance phase and throw a load of belt squats into that. But or even run the maintenance phase and you do one of the maintenance sessions every 5 days. and do some belt squat work, and core work. But yeah, that it's a hard squat cycle, the RTA.
No, it's intimidating.
George Latter says, how to choose weights for power clean for athletes. I've been told that if it's moving fast enough to catch height, it's moving fast enough. But do you think power cleans be moved too slow and still power cleans can be moved too slow and still made? I really don't like slow power cleans for athletes. Because they're not working for me in two different ways. The first way they're not working for me is that velocity, that speed, that uh, motor unit firing sequence isn't going off as fast as I want it to go off. And so then the barbell isn't moving at the correct speed. You're not getting what I want out of it. I could be doing fast deadlifts and getting a much better outcome from them, or I could be doing fast hex bar deadlifts or fast RDLs or fast squats, probably getting a better outcome. The second reason I really don't like it is because nothing is more dangerous than a power clean you nearly caught. Failing power cleans is vicious. Sarah, the administrative mastermind behind Sika Strength and the customer service at Sika Strength, Sarah dropped a 90-kilo power clean or 95-kilo power clean on her leg when she was 16 or 17. And that was one of the most gruesome things I've ever seen in weightlifting.
That's
That left a dent in her quad.
But that my brain didn't process that as I was watching it, because she'd made the weight beforehand perfect, and it was like up like 4 or 5 kilos.
Yeah.
And then it happened, but my brain was just like, just nothing. It just registered that she'd fallen, dropped the bar, and it was clearly a vicious accident.
Yeah.
My brain was just like, what the fuck just happened here?
Yeah.
So that generally what you'll see in the research when it comes to this, George, is the percentage of body weight a lot of times they will use, and it varies depending on the research you look at. Usually it's between, this is not that large a variance when it comes to actual power clean weights, but it's a large variance when you look at it percentage wise. So a lot of times it'll be between like 80% of the athlete's body weight all the way up to like 110% of the athlete's body weight. And a lot of the time, like Dara just talked about, those deadlifts could be just as beneficial. A lot of times they'll use pulls at the athlete's 110% of the athlete's body weight, and they'll get the same performance out of it. So speed is very, very important. The power cleans can be very, very dangerous. Just as we've seen from Jose Bolivian, he dislocated his knee, or he tore his MCL and meniscus from attempted heavy power clean, and it does need to be 220 to injure you. You can hurt yourself with 100 kilos, no problem. So a lot of times it goes by percentage of body weight, or you could be super savvy and get some kind of bar velocity meter or some kind of accelerometer. They're expensive, they're cumbersome, they're hard to be set up right, they're hard to be consistent with, but they can be quite useful. So I'd look at percentage of body weight on top of the quality of reps, how well your power cleans are moving, how well the barbell is moving, how well you're moving around the barbell, how you're feeling, is technique staying nice and consistent, a couple of different variables. Typically when any athletes we use get power cleans, it's really rare, to be honest, unless they're a very good athlete, that it goes over their body weight in a lot of scenarios. Sometimes you'll get that freak, and you'll know if you're that freak because you're like, did you see George power clean 160? And George be like, oh, I just do this sometimes, and they're like,
no, you know, because people will call you Big George.
Yeah, it'll be Big George power clean or Fast George.
Hey, big guy.
But most of the time, if you look at, let's say, a BJJ athlete has power cleans, they might be at 75% of their body weight for sets of 3, and they're getting loads of benefit from that. And yeah, you might have those Olympic level sprinters who can do like a 150 or 160, but you'll know in that scenario, it'll be self-obvious. Most of the time, it's operated by like fast barbell speeds and relative percentage of your body weight. The benefit of doing a 150 kilo power clean or 130 kilo power clean for most athletes is very insignificant. The barrier for entry, or the largest gain, is made by doing any power cleans, and then after that, then the upper weights aren't as important unless it's pure power output. So if you're a thrower or someone, it kind of does help to get more weight, but you still need magnitudes more weight. 120 to 125, not that big a deal. 120 to 175, big deal, big changes, so there is orders of magnitude, and there's a lot of variables involved. Unmec said, "Hi lads, what do you think would be the natural limit to a 90 to 100 kilo male in weightlifting?" We get this question a lot, and the answer is you just don't know.
You never know, because the most talented weightlifters, all of them in history, have taken gear.
But the problem is when you ask this question, do you mean like what can the average elite 90-ish to 100 kilo male lift, or what would the world record be? Because they're two very different questions.
They're very different questions.
Because the world record could be 15% in front of that average elite male. Like if we look at,
What's the wording of the question?
so he's saying, what do you think?
Natural limit.
Yeah. So, but this question comes up a lot in different forms. So like if you look at the European 73s, I think the snatch is topped out at like 156 or something, but then she's young, can snatch like 170 or 172 in training, which is probably more than 50. No, not quite 15%, but it like depends on the natural limit. If I had to suspect what everybody in the world does weightlifting and everybody is natural and all the best athletes get knocked through, I'd suspect, say, for a 100 kilo male, the average elite lifter, like I don't know, 10,000 lifters, you might see 50 of them could do something in the region of 165-ish maybe, and 205 or something like that. Maybe a little bit less than 100. And then the world record would be probably something in the region of maybe 170 and probably 210-ish, I would say. I would suspect. That's a big ballpark numbers, and I know someone's going to quote me on this in 6 months, but if you put a gun to my head, that's probably what I would suspect, and do with that information with what you will.
In my opinion, the question is the same as asking what would the 100-meter record be if nobody wore running spikes. Some people run 100 meters without running spikes, but the best runners in the world that you see in competition all wear spikes and all run in a track. It's just really weird the way the sport of weightlifting is.
And like, is it what could they lift in training with straps in the best training hall?
Yeah.
Or like what is it they do in competition?
Because that's a massive difference as well. Is like, over the course of my 10-year career, I went into the gym and I was able to snatch 170 on this day. Things were going great. It was a great training cycle. Or is it at an international level competition where you're competing against people and your attempts are being bumped around and you have to make weight and you have to do snatch and clean and jerk on the same? Is it a competition total? Is it heaviest snatch and heaviest clean and jerk? It's a really...
I'd love to know.
Great question.
I would love to know, but no one can answer this question really. No one. Well, no. Someone has the answer out there, but see, the problem is, right, that the answer to this is that the chances are, if you're that male who can lift the most amount of weight, by the time you get to that scenario, someone's already going to have given you gear. You're going to probably figure out how to get gear yourself, and you'll just be kind of fucking like it's like there's definitely a name for this scenario. There's definitely some kind of law or something for it where like it's you'll never know, because if you're in that scenario you won't end up in that scenario.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah, like it just... Zach DeLander's here.
Hey,
Zach. Zach, someone brought it up earlier, viciously talked about the squat with Jessica Bittner.
I think you talked about him being beaten by Jessica.
No, someone said you should do Jessica's squat.
We definitely should.
On the squat series.
Zach, I can't wait for our trip abroad.
Yeah. How drunk do you make Zach get?
I think we can get him very drunk.
White girl drunk.
Dr. Demographics, regular contributor to the channel, says, "You Sika sleep. Last 2 nights and REM sleep has been through the roof. I struggle with deep and REM sleep, but so far so good with the supplement." That's great to hear. Dr. Demographics, I'd love to know, are you using a Whoop? Or like some sort of Fitbit or something? But I'm glad to hear you're getting on well with it. I see a couple more comments about Sika sleep and people have gotten their orders. So I'm really excited to hear back. Thanks very much for letting us know.
Yeah, really, we never put out bad products, and it's great because when you put out stuff, you don't have to be worried. Like, you're always concerned, you're hoping, but it's a great product, and it's something we've been working on for a long time. So it's very reassuring to hear the results back from people. So really look forward to getting more of those. Not That Strong is trying to trigger me. He said, thoughts on fitness tracker, Whoops, etc.
Whoop.
So I made a longer video on this and why fitness trackers can't actually track your recovery. It's physically impossible as of right now, based on the science and the metrics for recording recoverability and the metrics around that. None of these fitness trackers take blood samples or do any physical testing on you. So they cannot accurately give you a recovery score or even give you a score at all. The amount of effort that goes into studies that looks at recovery, there's blood sampling, creatine kinase, cortisol, testosterone levels, growth hormone levels. You might get a more in depth, you might get muscle fiber analysis, you might get you'll get physical testing parameters, so repeating of particular physical activities, whether it be sprinting or squatting, that look at your ability, that actually tell you how recovered you are. Because if we're taking that as recoverability, are you talking about muscles recovering? Are you talking about local muscular fatigue? Are you talking about systemic fatigue? Are you talking about central nervous system fatigue? Are you talking about ability to perform? You could be under recovered but still perform to 100% of your capacity, or so close that it's statistically insignificant in a study. There's so many things involved in this. However, their liberal use of the word recovery aside, um, fitness trackers are getting very accurate for the things that they record, in terms of not the data they present to you or the compiled data that they give you random scores on, but the actual things they're recording. For example, heart rate. If you have a heart rate variability monitor, um, you know, how long you potentially get to sleep. For the price you pay, they're very, very useful in that regard. But it's just on the recoverability stuff that they give. I think is very, very to be honest, it's kind of unethical, because it's not correct. It's very wrong.
Problematic.
It's wrong. Like, it's not true. It's undeniably incorrect currently, based on any of the science in regards to recoverability.
It's also not like that data can be. It's not like they have some in-house testing methods.
Yeah.
That nobody else knows about. Because
Yeah.
literally tracking of this kind of stuff is one of the most studied aspects in sports science or exercise science. The tracking of physical activity and your recovery from it is a very, very active field at the moment. Interestingly, one area I really like those activity trackers for is for actually tracking activity. So
Oh yeah.
people, when they need to be more active, although we train a lot of athletes, we also train a lot of normal people who just do a sport. And part of that is people want to be in better shape. So a lot of the time we give recommendations around an amount of physical activity we should be doing a day or per week. And people who tend to track that tend to have far better outcomes in terms of, I'm getting the 15,000 steps a day. I'm putting in that, I'm going for that extra walk in the morning or that walk in the evening. I'm being more physically active. Maybe I'll go for a hike at weekends, or I go for a cycle at weekends, or I'll walk here instead of driving here. That's the biggest area of success I've seen with those. And everyone seems to have them. I used them myself last year and the year before when I was doing a lot of running. They're incredibly good at doing some of those jobs. It's just when they extrapolate out that data to say you're now recovered or you're not recovered, or the new ad that Whoop have is Whoop now measures stress. That's a very, very interesting one. We actually have that queued up for a video at some point. Whoop and the measurement of stress using Whoop is a rabbit hole we're going to dig into, because it's
well, we've done a fitness tracker video already. I don't know if we will, because of legal issues.
Do you reckon they'd have a go off it?
100%. They're massive.
Yeah. But yeah, Whoop can't measure stress. Nobody can effectively measure stress. You particularly can't measure stress with an accelerometer and some heart rate variability. Jimmy,
do you see a good reason to implement plyometrics and sprinting in a weightlifting program?
I don't.
No.
There's very, very specific cases where you might implement it. I know as some weightlifters have gone up in a weight class and they want to still feel athletic, they'll do some additional plyos. Fair amount of weightlifters will do plyos in their off season just to kind of keep them training and keep them tipping along and doing something. But for the vast majority of people, and that's what we're talking to here, is weightlifters, whether they be recreational and competitive or recreational and non-competitive, the vast majority of weightlifters will never need to do plyos in their weightlifting sessions. They're nice in certain cases, but for most people, no. Definitely not sprinting as well.
Oh yeah,
Oh my
100%.
God.
No way, not sprinting.
Definitely not sprinting. Joshua Saunders says, the main coach at my gym asked me why on earth I'm doing sets of 10. I'm on the RTA. Just shows how uninformed some people are. That's hilarious.
Jesus Christ.
It's crazy when you'll hear some people being like, no, anything above 5 is cardio, bro.
And nothing CrossFit, bro.
What are you talking about? Kieran Hoorisky says, got my Sika sleep and it gave me a hard on. That's very likely you'll have a hard on in the morning.
Good sleep and zinc will do that to you.
Yeah.
KCB said, what do you think of those tier weightlifting shoes? I see enough of those things secondhand. I'm thinking something's not quite right with them. Oh, that's weird you're seeing them secondhand. But so interesting enough, so we have the shoe. I really like the shoe. I think they're a very good and modernly available shoe. Their unique system is absolutely different, and there's definitely something going on with these wider shoe base. It does feel different in the lifts. I actually have 1.5 critiques of the shoe that I would like to see improved, and it would be a fantastic shoe. I'll talk about them here because we'll do a full length review, and this won't ruin the review per se. But the first thing is the sole part, or the forefoot part, is too soft underfoot. Even if you take out the insole, and there's quite a bit of support in the insole. It's very interesting. There's a lot of arch support and lateral side support, or the blade of your foot support. But if you take that out, it's still very, very soft underfoot. So there's two reasons you don't want this. One, it doesn't feel very good, but two, softer underneath is a little bit dampening of force production. Now, how much difference does it make in a weightlifting shoe like that? I don't know. It doesn't feel great on heavy squats. On the Olympic lifts, it feels perfect. You don't notice it at all. You have that wider base. I personally would like a slightly higher effective heel height on the shoe, but that's more of a personal preference rather than a actual negative aspect about the shoe. So the main thing is that softness in the front foot needs to be improved, and I must talk to Aaron about this. But overall, it's a genuinely good shoe. And when I put them on first, I was talking to Fitz, and I was like, oh man, these feel so different. I don't know if I like these. And I was really worried that we'd have to do kind of a bad review of the shoe. But they are very good build quality. I really like the materials. They feel very nice when you're Olympic lifting. Now, you could probably get harder insoles, which would probably make a helpful difference. But if you take the shoe as is, they look quite nice. And that the big thing about them, which I think is the main thing everyone's wondering about, is does the wider toe box help? And it definitely feels different. And I'm confident it feels different in a better way.
Oh.
Yeah. But will I switch? I'm still wearing Ram 2s. I'm really weird about things like this. I'm really far into a training block right now, and I'm happy to try for a few training sessions. But be considering I have a lot, like there's heavier lifts and progressively heavier lifts. I don't like changing those things at this stage. If it was a couple of weeks ago, like I changed with the legacy trees, no problem. It doesn't matter when you're dicking around. I wasn't even wearing shoes and belts a few weeks ago. I was lifting in my fucking socks, no big deal. But when you get later into training session, I'm trying to refine my clean technique as much as possible. I'm trying to squat really heavy, and changing those things just adds a little bit of questions into sessions that I don't want to be adding questions into. And so I'll wear them on some things. So it's maybe if I'd started the block with them, I'd still keep wearing them. But right now, I don't want to change from the Romileo 2s. Maybe I'm just indoctrinated by the Romileo 2s that I can never change. But the tier is definitely a good shoe. They're a very unique shoe, and I think they'll probably come down to personal preference if you like them. The only problem with that is that it's very hard to try those and get, you can't just it's not like ASOS Rebuy t-shirt you can send it back. There's a lot of money involved in weightlifting shoes and stuff. So certainly interesting. I think you'll like them when you get a chance.
Yeah, I need to try and squeeze my foot into them. Max Offerman says, just out of interest, in the combat athlete program, why are there relatively little rows but approximately more pull-ups than particles in the observable universe? So there's pull-ups twice a week in the combat athlete program. The reason we have pull-ups twice a week in the combat athlete program, firstly, many combat athletes are extremely proficient with the pull-up. So pull-ups and calisthenics in general tend to be a kind of mainstay for many combat athletes across striking sports and grappling sports, everybody does pull-ups, right? So firstly, you've got quite low barrier for entry with those. It's not like getting people to do an ironing board row or a seal row. People will have some experience with it. Also, internal rotation of the shoulders and strengthening of the lats and strengthening of the shoulder capsule in general is very, very important for striking sports and for grappling sports. So this kind of fighter stance of being forward like this, everyone's here for a reason, right? Shoulders of jiu-jitsu athletes and shoulders of boxers don't naturally come forward for no reason. They come forward because everything happens out in front of them. Many of the positions are kind of built around this position, and many of our kind of offensive and defensive movements involve internal rotation of the shoulders. So obviously, we want the shoulders to be very strong in that position, and we want to train the shoulders to be healthy around those positions. The other thing is that for rows, and depending on the row variation we use in that case, if it's something like a pendlay row or a bent over row, or maybe an unsupported single arm cheetah row, what we're doing there is we're loading the spinal column in a way that many non-strength sports athletes wouldn't be used to doing excessively. So you're already squatting in the program, you're already doing RDLs in the program, you're already going to be doing some RDL or some deadlifts or some power cleans in the program. And that loading of the spinal column, particularly loading of the back, isn't something you can just throw more onto for a combat athlete. You can't simply just keep adding more without some errors happening or some hiccups along the road. So in the case of a rowing variation, we can get them through a pull-up or an inverted row where the spine is relatively unloaded, rather than them getting to do some sort of horizontal row where they're in the bent over position and the back gets loaded up a small bit more.
Yeah, you'll see also a lot of times if it's maybe jiu-jitsu or judo, a lot of athletes spend a lot of time doing this already, and we just don't want to be over abusing those tissues involved in that. As helpful it might be to have stronger positions there, we can get a stronger back in other manners. You know, a lot of times in the gi, if you're pulling guards or throwing in judo or something, you're going to be like this. You know, if you're in no gi, you might be pulling people in really close like this a lot of time. You're hugging onto stuff, and you'll spend a lot of time in this contracted, internal rotated position with your biceps tensed, your forearms flexed, and you just don't want to be over abusing that, because you know, these tendons here are quite sensitive to inflammation. Hand tendons are very sensitive to that kind of stuff as well. So
that kind of lengthening, that eccentric motion as well, is great for your shoulders. Like everybody in a grappling sport and most people in striking sports have short shoulders. So that lengthening, that hanging there, that strengthening your capsule is very, very important. And twice a week isn't that many.
Sheila sells sore shoulders on the seashore.
Nemo2661 says, currently doing Clarence's program, planning on trying a Sika program after. What would you recommend and how long would you leave between programs? So really, it depends. Answer comes out once again. If the Clarence program ends in a massive max out, and you kind of ramping up and driving the car off the proverbial programming cliff, then you're going to need a bit of a break. You know, that break might be a week, that break might be 10 days. You might actually need 2 weeks of lighter training to let your central nervous system relax a small bit. It really depends how hard you go. If it's just a normal max out, hit some heavy singles, you finish the training block, then you might just need to take kind of 3 or 4 days, slightly lighter training or maybe no training at all, and then start the new program. The one thing you do need to keep in mind is that if you take 2 weeks off, you can't just hop straight back on the train. That train is in motion and you're not quite in motion yet. So if you do have to take a prolonged break, if you have kind of crashed and burned after a big max out and you've taken the 2 week break or 10 days off and done absolutely nothing, just go back to a week or 10 days of nice light training, normal weightlifting training or powerlifting training, whichever it is. I assume weightlifting training in this case. Go back, a nice, easy, light week of training, and then kick off into the new block.
Hey lads, how would I go about determining my own lever joint lengths and finding lifters whose technique I can emulate? So this isn't a smarmy answer. You just have to look at yourself and then look at other lifters and be like, oh, he kind of looks like me. You know, it's very easily identifiable. You look at torso length, femur length, tibia length, arm length. Like, for example, do you look like Tian Tao or do you look like Lasha? Do you look like Valentina Cambe or do you look like Gorman Asian? And it's kind of as simple as that. Um, that's Are your arms and your legs basically the same length? You might be like, and my torso is relatively normal. Maybe I'm more similar to Nino, but are you midsection built like a cupboard or refrigerator, and then do the tops of your arms just hang down above your hip? Then you might go, okay, maybe I'm more built like Ilya than I am maybe someone like Nino or something, for example. It's relatively simple. It's not also always the best idea. Generally, technique is quite uniform when it comes to the kind of snatch, clean and jerk, if that's what you're looking for. Although if it is strength training, it is a little bit different sometimes. But just kind of look at yourself and then looking for those lifters and trying to identify from those large sections of your body build what it is you look like.
We pick a question.
Sure.
Okay, so last question for me is James Dillon Fulbright, friend of Sika Stan, says, looking forward to seeing that 180 kilo bench press, Owen, and congrats in advance for beating Tashiki at strict pressing.
Oh my God, I haven't even been strict pressing. I was talking about it. It's just so sore, my shoulders and elbows. I haven't been doing it enough, but I need to get back on it.
You need to. I'd say if you did 125 or 130, that would.
Tajiki's like 88 kilos now.
Tashiki is in some condition.
He's in great nick.
Oh my God. I have one more here if you
go for it.
B says, what do you think about Bas Rutten curing, in inverted commas, his asthma using his breathing tool? So firstly, asthma and having asthma or having sports asthma or sport-induced asthma are two different things. So asthma in a general sense, if you just want to think about it, is inflammation of your lung tissue, right? The lungs swell up due to some reason, some stimulus causes them to swell up, and it becomes difficult to breathe. There's constriction of your airways. Some people get that when they start exercising. Some people get that due to environmental conditions like dust or particulates in the air. Some people just get it because they're unlucky. Many people have asthma or sports-induced asthma earlier on in life, and it almost goes away. They talk about certain age brackets where you grow out of asthma, and that certainly does seem to be the case for many people. I had asthma when I was younger. I had asthma inhalers. That's no longer an issue for me. Thankfully, many people are in that condition or in that situation. Asthma inhalers are used extensively by athletes to open up their airways. They are very effective. So I'm not saying this is the case in Bas Rutten's particular situation, but there are many asthmatic athletes who couldn't be any further from being asthmatic. They would have fantastic lung volume, that rate of flow, the amount of volume in their lungs would be very good, but they will become asthmatic, get the asthma medication, and these are very heavily leveraged. These are leveraged probably more so than any other performance enhancing drug in terms of the cardiovascular sports like track and field, but also team sports and field sports. So soccer, rugby, all of those. This is a very common performance enhancing drug, or a very common area of investigation when it comes down that route. So when you look at an athlete like Bas, it's very likely an athlete like Bas had asthma. It's very likely they used asthma medication, but I would be somewhat cautious about saying their asthma is the same as somebody else's who might have kind of medical condition or some sort of environmental condition which causes their breathing to be somewhat labored. The second thing I would say is it is very unlikely that through using some sort of breathing tool, you're going to fix that. Now, certainly having a healthier cardiovascular system, doing cardiovascular training can help with that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you how to cure your asthma. And I don't think Bas should tell you how to do it either. But I would be skeptical with a capital S of anyone saying you're going to cure your asthma by using a breathing tool. I really don't think that's something you should be investigating. I certainly think being healthier, being fitter, being stronger, having a better set of lungs, being in better environmental conditions, trying to stay away from dust or pollen during your everyday life or your work life in particular, industrial or pollutants can be really, really bad for it. But I would be uber skeptical of someone using a breathing tool and getting rid of their asthma.
I like bass.
I like bass a lot.
Boss.
Bass.
Not be base. Hey, base. Base Rudin. Okay, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Appreciate all the questions. We'll see you again same time next week, or actually we'll see you tomorrow for a video. But for the live stream, it's a little bit different because everyone's here. Today's new show is, of course, brought to you by Sika Sleep, our new Sika Sleep supplement, purposely built for you to get better quality sleep. You get it at sikastrength.com. You can get it once off, or you can get it on subscription with a discount. And a lot of people have checked out so far, and we're very confident that it can help you get better sleep. So thanks for watching. Goodbye. You are the weakest thing.